Shalom. Welcome to the Messianic Hour with Rabbi Scott Sekulow. The Messianic Hour is a program designed to give you insight into the Jewish roots of your faith. Rabbi Scott is also here to answer your questions and help you gain a deeper understanding of Bible prophecy. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Scott Sekulow.
We're going to do a special show this week because you're determined that we're getting through Acts chapter 21.
You know, I'm just taking pity on our poor listeners that have to keep slugging through this. I know it's a lot, but
this is a deep chapter. It's really important, and our goal is to do it, so we're going to do both the first and second half so we can get this one done and go on to chapter 22. But that'll be a great time. So if you haven't heard the previous weeks, go check out rabbiscott.com for more on that as well. And you can listen to past shows right there on your iPhones, your iTunes, all that. Matter of fact, we're also getting our app for the Androids as well. Matter of fact, Kim, how much longer on that? Have we heard from? Okay, so we're almost there. Great. So we'll be, for you app people, for you droids, we'll be getting that up for you very soon. So that's exciting.
Honey, you're rolling with it today.
I'm rolling with it, okay. Well, Judy, there's a lot going on in Israel right now, too. And, we've been talking about the scripture, but we also need to understand what's going on right now with Israel. With all these things going on around the world or in the Middle East, Israel's kind of been quiet right now, but what we're seeing is, we heard this past week in the news, that Abbas is once again trying to go in front of the UN to go ahead and try to say that they want to become a nation, be recognized as a state. And so this is an issue that Israel's going to be having to deal with once again as we look at that as well to see the situation going on there.
Well, we actually see that President Perez has met with Pinata, our U.S. Secretary of Defense, and basically says, you've got to do something about Iran. And the thing with Iran is it's full of ayatollahs. And their whole thing is basically a Islamic Middle East. And so while they've got the nuclear aspect of it, you've got to really be concerned about the spread of this kind of fanatic Islam.
That's right. And so we're going to be keeping that in our prayers. We got to watch what's going on with that. Again, you want more information, go to our website, rabbiscott.com. Sign up for our newsletter, our weekly email, and you'll get a free book, I Have a Friend Who's Jewish, to you just for signing up. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Messianic Hour. I'm Judy Sekulow. I'm glad that you're with us today as we are on Acts 21, verse 23.
Yes.
But we're going to get through this.
Through 39. We're going through 39. 23 through, or 38. We're going to finish the 39. The rest goes really into chapter 22, so we're pulling it through there. So let's take a look at this. First of all, we're now at the point that Paul has returned to Jerusalem. He has basically confronted the Jerusalem Council, which was made up of James the Just, the half-brother of Yeshua, who's the rabbi at the congregation in Jerusalem, and the rest of the disciples. They come to him saying, there's been these rumors that you're teaching the Jews not to keep the Torah that are among the Gentiles. And they realize this is not true, and to prove this is not true, and that he is keeping the Torah and teaching others to do so, they give him the Nazarite vow. Now, Judy, what's really interesting is apparently during this time, it was not an uncommon thing for people who had taken the Nazarite vow not to be able to finish it, not because they don't want to, but because they don't have the finances to pay it off, because you're talking about a number of sacrifices that we're going to look at this and see. In fact, the writings of the rabbis tell us the stories of just this taking place. So this was it was not an uncommon situation. But we see here that in the effort to prove his commitment to Torah obedience, Saul agrees to pay for the expenses of the 4 others, including himself, so that they can finish theirs, and he can now take and complete his, which takes care of not only purchasing, but there's actual sacrifices. Remember, this is after the resurrection of our Messiah, and yet the believers were still doing sacrifices to that day.
And if you go to number 6, verses 13 through 21, it actually tells us what is required to complete a Nazarite vow. So for the 5, for Shaul and the other 4, they had to have 5 unblemished yearling lambs as a burnt offering. They had to have 5 unblemished yearling ewe lambs as a sin offering. You had to have 5 unblemished rams for a fellowship offering. So we're up to 15 right there. Then 33 liters, and for those of us who really aren't up on our metrics here, nearly 2 bushels of fine flour mixed with oil, and that's a supplementary grain offering. They had to have 8 liters or 2 gallons of wine for the wine libations, and then you had to have 5 additional baskets of unleavened bread with oil for grain offerings. So that is just a significant expense that was required for Shaul.
Right. And Judy, so you had a burnt offering, a fellowship offering, a grain offering, the wine offering, an additional grain offering, and then the third one, though, that I skipped, I did it on purpose, was a sin offering. So we still see here that the disciples were still giving up their offerings at the temple. Why? It's a shadow of what's to come. So it's not that God did away with it. On the contrary, it's a reminder of what is to come.
Well, and it's interesting that people will say, if Yeshua did away with the Torah, or we don't, he fulfilled the Torah, he abolished the Torah. Well, sacrifices are required. That's where they're found, is in the Torah. And that with that, if it had been done away with his death and resurrection, obviously the word didn't get out. Or there's a misconception here, and the fact is it's still in effect, it's still being done, right. And that's why Shaul was doing
right.
it.
You have this whole concept of Torah versus grace. And it's not Torah versus, it's Torah and grace. You have to have them both together. They cannot be done by themselves. Torah without grace leads to death, and grace without Torah leads to death, because why would you need grace if you don't have Torah? If you don't know what's right or wrong, you don't need grace. You can't have one versus the other. That's not how it works. And that's how you see many people putting it. And Judy, a lot of that comes to the understanding of 1 Corinthians 9, verses 20 through 22. Why don't you read it real quick?
And it says, "To the Jews, I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I become like one under the law, although I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, although I am not free from God's law, but am under Messiah's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some."
Now, Judy, when you're reading that, people need to know that the terms, though I myself am not under the law, are in brackets. They're in, and then also, though I am free from God's law, but am under Messiah's law, are also in brackets. Meaning, these weren't originally in the first writings, and this is trying to be almost a clarification. Unfortunately, what people read that is, oh, we're no longer under the law. That's not what is being said here. In fact, it's unfair to really think that the Apostle Saul was any much of a pretender, or that he put a face on to say, here I am following the Torah, but when I'm with the Gentiles, I don't do that.
Well, and I think what you have to do is, again, it's what we teach, is you have to take things back into context. Right. And what Rabbi Shaul was actually pointing out was that one needs to be aware of one's content when communicating the gospel. If, for example, if you're talking to someone who only understands Russian and you're speaking in English, you're not communicating a message. So what he's saying is, communicate in their language so they understand. You've got to first get them to understand before you can have a behavior change. It's like raising a child. Our daughter is as she likes to say, a preteen now, and it becomes so much easier to say, I need you to do this because when she understands the rationale behind something, she's much more willing to do it than just say, well, just do this. So it's an education process of, growing her into being a responsible adult by understanding why we do these things, understanding the importance of things, and communicating it to a way that she can understand. That's what he was doing, was communicating in a way that these people could understand.
Really, among the Jews, you can argue the Torah because they understand the Torah to prove Messiah. But to the Greeks, you can't do that. So to them, you have to argue from a theological approach. And so that's really what Paul was talking about here. And it wasn't like there's one law for God and one law for Messiah. They're the same law, the same Torah. Yeshua himself said, I have not come to abolish the Torah or the prophets, but to bring them to their perfection, to their fullness. And those who keep the commandments and teach others to do so will be considered great in the kingdom of heaven. Those who do not and do not teach others will be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. The key thing here is faith in Messiah. That's what gets us into heaven. Keeping the commandments, keeping God's Torah are the blessings, the treasures in heaven.
Well, and as you found, you've been to the Ukraine, you've been to Argentina, you've been to Brazil,
Cuba,
you've been to Panama, India. All of these, you found that you have to present the gospel in a manner in which they can understand. I love your story. I'm going to digress from it. I usually don't go on rabbit trails, but I'm going on a rabbit trail. When you were in India with the little boy who was healed miraculously, couldn't walk, God healed him through prayer. You go to the religious synagogue,
the Orthodox
synagogue that you could not share about Messiah at all. You were told, but you said, I'm not going to honor that. But you know what? God provided you an opportunity because you looked over and you saw that little boy and you were able to say, you know him. You know how he was. Look at him now. This is a testimony to God.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing that he was there. It was that I didn't know that was his synagogue, and how God had orchestrated all that in advance. And here he's up and walking, and they couldn't argue. And afterwards, I actually shared about the man at the temple standing up and walking because I could, was able to do that. And many of them came up to me afterwards and said, "I want God in my heart, Messiah in my heart." And that was such an amazing experience to be like Saul, going into a traditional synagogue and being invited to stand up and share, and God provided that.
But sharing within the parameters that A, they had given you, so you were respectful of their authority, and B, in a way that they could totally relate to. They knew this little boy his whole life, knew he could never walk. So it just goes to show that you can't quote Bible verses to somebody who doesn't believe in the Bible. You have witnessed to many people throughout the years. You've gone on many different trips to share, and you just can't go in with your set script and say, I'm going to do it this way, because that doesn't always relate to the person. There's so many stories that you've told over the years in Israel where you're ministering and they're talking about people are drinking and on drugs and all that, and you can't relate, and here comes this one person that can relate to something in your life. Right. But again, it's all giving them something that they can relate to and then point them to Messiah. Exactly. And that's the whole thing he was saying.
To the Jew, you're absolutely right. The thing about that, my message to a Jewish person is different than my message to a Gentile, just like what Saul said here. Because one I can argue Torah with, the other I have to do it from a theological, a thinking point of view in that sense. And so that's a great point. We're going to continue this conversation right after this break. I want you to go to the Messianic Hour's website, RabbiScott.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Remember, we are a listener-supported show. You can also plant a tree in Israel right there on the site. We'll be back right after this. Stay tuned.